real housing reform, things like, reforming zoning, cutting permit times, lowering impact fees. I mean, it's just insane that we're talking about government costs of $140,000 to build a home in Washington state before you even break ground. But those things take time and cooperation, right? Because you've got municipalities pushing back saying we want local control, and legislators are like, they don't want to step on their feet. But it's like, the whole not in my backyard situation. But we know, and history shows, it's the only way to sustainably lower prices when we tackle those issues. And Minneapolis is a great case study. After they ended single-family only zoning in 2019, housing supply went up and rent growth slowed dramatically.
Americans are capable of achieving extraordinary things when they have the freedom and opportunity to do so. This is American Potential.
Hey everyone, and welcome to the American Potential Podcast. I'm your host, David Fromm. So it's Halloween, and as we wrap up our spooky series, we've dug up one of the scariest bills, and it comes out of Washington state. Now, everyone wants an affordable place to call home, but this new law could send chills down the spines of renters in the state. Instead of tackling the real monster, Washington's housing shortage, lawmakers decided to mess with the price side, and that's where things get downright terrifying. So, what did they do that's turning the housing market into a real-life horror story? Let's talk with Heather Andrews, who is the Western State Regional Director, and Washington is one of her states. Heather, welcome back.
Hey, David. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, always love having you. And so, now, unfortunately, I know a number of your states that you are the regional state director for have a lot of scary policies. They're very not liberty-oriented nor fiscally conservative, but this one we wanted to highlight in particular around housing. So just to start with, what's the housing situation like in a state like Washington?
Yeah, so Washington's housing market is very much out of balance. They're short over 1 million homes that they'll need by 2044, according to projections. And that shortage, as you can imagine, is driving up prices everywhere. Vacancy rates are below 3%, and in some areas, people are spending half of their income just to keep a roof over their heads.
Oh.
And builders are describing it as like a death by 1,000 cuts because they've got lengthy permits, rising fees, and land use rules that block new housing. And so when it takes longer to get permission to build than to actually build, you end up with a lot of scarcity. And scarcity, as we know, drives costs. In fact, I don't know if you know this, but even the government cost before you even break ground to build in the state is around $140,000. So the problem isn't that landlords suddenly got greedy or renters stopped working hard. It's that we've boxed ourselves into a system where too few homes chase too many people. And until we fix that, prices are just going to keep going up.
So what was the state's solution to tackling this problem?
Yeah, so the state went with a policy. As we know, there's a Democrat majority in the state, and they went with a policy called rent stabilization, which is really rent control. And so it caps rent increases for existing tenants at 7% plus inflation, which is up to 10%. And the goal was ultimately to protect renters from big jumps. And that instinct comes from a good place. But as we all know, rent control treats the symptom and not the cause. It's like trying to fight a drought by capping water usage without actually digging new wells.
Mm-hmm.
And so the underlying shortage remains. And we all know history shows that when government sets price caps without expanding supply, it discourages new investments. And so developers build fewer units, small landlords sell, and long-term affordability actually gets way worse.
So prior to that, what kind of increases were renters seeing maybe before they passed this legislation?
Yeah, that's a great question. So before the cap, we saw rent increases averaging about 9 to 12% statewide, and even higher in places like Seattle, Bellevue, and Tacoma, which are some of the more, cities, larger cities in the state. And some renters were seeing double-digit jumps year after year. And those increases were painful, but they were also really a symptom of how tight the housing market already was. Construction costs, like I kind of talked about, had jumped nearly 30% since 2020, and demand is outpacing supply at every price point. And so instead of addressing the bottlenecks that keep new housing from being built, the state chose to regulate the outcome. And yes, current tenants might get protection this year, but if new construction slows down, which we're seeing, we won't just see stable rents. We'll see fewer places to rent and higher rents for those coming in.
Yeah. So if I kind of think logically about this, if rent is, if providers or builders can charge less for rent year over year, and yet there's a real scarcity of it, they're less likely to keep building and increase the supply. And so that will put further pressure on rents going up, except now they're capped and they can't. So people will just leave the market, I guess, and there'll probably be fewer places to live in Washington, and we'll just be stuck with inadequate supply. Isn't that where we're going here?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Yep.
So my understanding is that there was an amendment that was introduced, but it was rejected. What was that?
Yeah, so one amendment would have exempted landlords who already charged below market rents, basically rewarding those who voluntarily decide to keep housing affordable. And similar policies elsewhere, like in California, showed that without these exemptions, landlords who'd kept prices low start exiting the market because obviously the math stops working. Rejecting that amendment definitely sends a bad signal. Even if you act responsibly, you'll still be penalized. And when voluntary affordability disappears, we know that we lose the kind of local community-based housing options we should be encouraging.
So this is not going to really add housing options in our view, which I imagine the legislators who introduced this and want to see this happen believe that it'll provide more affordable housing options for folks. But I mean, what do you think is going to happen?
Yeah, that's the heart of the problem. As you said, like it's not going to help add more housing options. Rent caps don't create new housing, they discourage it. So imagine a landlord in a city with strong tenant protections and rent caps, and he finds operating margins squeezed by higher property taxes, insurance costs going up, maintenance going up, but he can't raise rents much. So rather than invest in new units or maintain older ones, he actually chooses to convert an older rental building into condos or sells it as an owner occupied. And then that creates the rental stock shrinks. And according to major studies in San Francisco, expansion of rent control led landlords to reduce rental housing by 15%, then caused citywide market rents to increase another, by 5.1%. And you're not far from here, but another example is St. Paul, Minnesota, where construction permits plummeted after rent control, and they had to rewrite the policy just to get builders back. And then even in Oregon, which is like a state over, which passed kind of a milder version of this policy, developers in smaller cities said projects no longer penciled out. The math didn't work because of uncertainty about future rent caps. And so policies like this add risk on top of risk. And if we want more affordability, we need more homes, not more rules.
Yeah, why do you think the state didn't really focus more on trying to unleash more of the housing supply?
Well, good question, David, because politically, quick fixes are definitely easier to sell as a and it sounds good, right? It's like, oh, we're gonna cap the evil landlords from, pushing up higher rents on poor renters. But real housing reform, things like, reforming zoning, cutting permit times, lowering impact fees. I mean, it's just insane that you were talking about government costs of $140,000 to build a home in Washington state before you even break ground. But those things take time and cooperation, right? Because you've got municipalities pushing back saying we want local control, and legislators are like, yeah, you don't want to step on their feet. But it's like, the whole not in my backyard situation. But we know, and history shows, it's the only way to sustainably lower prices when we tackle those issues. And Minneapolis is a great case study. After they ended single family only zoning in 2019, housing supply went up and rent growth slowed dramatically. And that's proof that supply works. And Washington's kind of started down that road with some recent zoning reforms, but they really need to double down on that approach and not sidestep it with temporary caps.
Do you think the reticence to zoning reforms is based on like a not in my backyard type mentality, or there are other factors that are preventing governments from embracing broader zoning reforms?
Yes, I think so. I mean, we see this in, everywhere, really. I mean, there's a lot of individuals that are like, yeah, I don't really like the idea of adding, multifamily housing in my area because, it might attract the wrong kind of people. But at the same time, it's like the market, if the market's there, and there's a way to build multifamily without, creating issues for, some of the nice housing areas. And we've seen that. We've seen cities and municipalities get really creative with that in states across the country, where they build them close to the freeway, to corridors, to like where they have trains and buses, and so that people can easily access transportation to jobs. And so, but yeah, we are seeing the municipalities push back. And a lot of that is people that are getting elected by constituents that are saying, no, I do not want I don't want a density or, all these multifamily units because we want to protect my, neighborhood from those kind of people.
Sure. Yeah. Look, I can be sympathetic that like if someone lives in a place they really like, that change is scary. You don't want to, I mean, if you think it's a nice place and you think that, rightly or wrongly, that it, changing the type of units that are coming in is going to be detrimental. I'm sympathetic to the emotional response there, but the reality is like, everyone should be able to choose where they live. And I don't think there should be these soft pressures to say that, we can't, if someone wants to come in and build, that there's a market to go and build a multi-unit place that shouldn't happen. And I think you're right. There's a lot of communities. I know, like, even I live in the suburbs of Chicago. So similar in things going on in Washington and California and Minneapolis in the suburbs of Chicago. And one of them is, but we've seen a lot, like some of the downtown areas that are around train stations start to develop a lot of multi-unit, actually some high-end multi-unit stuff, but a lot of multi-unit dwellings. And still, the character of the communities are still lovely and still very desirable for people to go to.
Absolutely. Yeah. And when I always tell legislators that are, they are like, well, my, the city council member or the mayor, I'm getting pressure from them. And I always say, well, your job, municipalities are political subdivisions of the state, and the ultimate local control is the property owner. And so when the municipalities are stepping on the property owners and saying, you can't do this with your property, and they're, that's when they need to come in as state legislators and say, no. This individual has property rights, and we need to allow them to do what they want to do with their property. And that's, that's the localist control we have is the individual and that property owner to do what they want with that property.
So when was this just passed this year, right?
Yes, this last session. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It's probably might be too early to kind of see anything coming from it. I mean, I know that you said that you've watched in California and St. Paul, Minneapolis, and Oregon, kind of the results here. It'd be interesting to kind of see what happens, unless you can already see something. I don't know if you can tell what's happening yet.
I mean, yes, like, other states, that have rent control are like New York, California, and Oregon, but none of those, it has solved its housing crisis in any of those states. And in New York, decades of rent regulation created actually a two-tier system, and where some people pay below market rents for life, while everyone else pays sky-high prices. And then, in California, rents are still among the highest in the country, despite the cap. Housing prices are the highest in the country. And Oregon saw building slow way down after passing its law. The pattern is clear, obviously. Rent control doesn't make housing more affordable. It absolutely freezes a broken market in place. And the states that we're seeing that are succeeding in this area are those focused on supply, again, making it easier to build and renovate and invest. And that's really the plan that Washington, should take instead of doubling down on these broken policies. Absolutely. And we are seeing that. We are seeing, a huge decline in permits. Huge. And so that is basically saying, they were already low on both permits and construction, but it's signaling to developers, again, this market just got more risky. And so they're thinking, hey, well, then I just might build elsewhere. And that means, again, fewer units in the pipeline right when Washington needs them most. So, yes.
Well, as we're coming up on Halloween, maybe that's the scary part. If you live in Washington, there's likely to be less housing options and certainly less affordable housing options. And hopefully it's not a trend that we keep seeing throughout the country, because unfortunately we've seen it in particular a lot of kind of bluish states that seem to be tackling it this way. I think you're totally right. You called it out at the beginning. It's treating a symptom, not the underlying cause of why the housing costs are going up, and it's really unfortunate to taking this top down approach to try to control rents and affordability when really it's increasing supply that would really make the difference.
Yes, absolutely. Mm-hmm.
Well, Heather, I appreciate you joining again. You've been one of our most reliable, wonderful guests. You're always such a joy to talk to, and you always have great stories because, unfortunately, for your region, they do some crazy stuff.
Yes. Well, thank you.
Coming from a guy from Illinois, I can say that.
Well, and you're welcome. And sadly, I'm trying to change that. I really am, but it's a slow go. But we do, hopefully, a lot of people listen to this podcast and start taking action and get involved and talk to their legislators about how this is a problem. And again, there are great solutions out there. States that keep all, to actually tackle the right policies on housing, which are like zoning restrictions and all the other things, have made significant impacts in keeping housing costs low and rent low. So that's what we need to do here.
I think also when we zoom out, I live in Illinois right now, did a lot of politics there for a lot of years, grew up my whole life in New Jersey. It's a very unaligned place. I do work in New Mexico. I lived in California for a bit. I mean, I said, someone said to me, like, do you just love high taxes? I was like, no, I really don't. I've always been kind of liberty-oriented conservative living in these places. But one of the things I've done that I've realized, and I've always appreciated, and I'm sure you've realized the same thing, that a lot of us look at some of these states with just misguided policy, just really, I would consider irresponsible and left-leaning leaders. Mm-hmm. And yet there are a significant number of people who really want change. There's, you can hold a rally and you'll get hundreds and thousands of people. Or, you can be talking about these issues, whether it's like property taxes or housing or, pick your issue where we're trying to adopt a more freedom-oriented point of view. And there is a minority that is active and vocal and trying to make real change. And that's why I'm excited for the work you're doing. Like you're on the front lines of what AFP is trying to do. And, I feel like one of the things that Americans for Prosperity can really do is help provide an outlet and a partnership and some training and an aggregating of voices for those folks who sometimes feel kind of voiceless. And I always think like, we can't give up on these places because it's where so many Americans live. And there's so many people who want to be engaged and want to make change in their community. And they're inspirational to me because, it's fighting against kind of the powers that be in the establishment and trying to turn that ship. But man, when you can do it, and there's some states that are examples of it, like, West Virginia or Wisconsin way back, where that really pays some great dividends. And so I kind of aspire for our folks that can be where we get to.
Yes, absolutely. Never stop fighting.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Heather, thank you for the work you do. It's great. And I appreciate you sharing the scary story with us. Try not to be too creeped out. So, folks, if you like this episode and would like to stay connected with the podcast, be sure to like and subscribe to our channel, as well as following us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. And always remember, liberty and freedom are easily taken for granted. Don't take it for granted. Go out there and defend freedom and liberty. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you on the next episode.
Thank you for listening to American Potential. You may listen to more stories from Americans working every day to expand freedom and opportunity in their communities by visiting AmericanPotential.com.